Welcome to Hidden Pages of Slavery. The 1904 portrait appeared again, and historians grew uneasy as they enlarged the image of the bride. The photograph arrived at the New Orleans Historical Collection inside a water-stained cardboard box. It was part of an estate donation from a Garden District mansion that was being emptied after its elderly owner passed away. Archivist Claire Duchamp had handled hundreds of similar donations before. Attics and basements often produced forgotten treasures mixed with ordinary junk. If you like real and hidden history, please like this video and subscribe to the channel. And if you're watching, don't forget to comment your good name and the name of your beautiful country below. Most items needed careful cataloging, but revealed nothing important. This box was the same at first glance. It held the usual signs of a wealthy family's past: silk gloves, yellowed letters tied with ribbon, a dull silver compact, and at the bottom, wrapped in fragile tissue paper that fell apart when touched, a single large photograph in an ornate brass frame. Claire gently removed the frame and studied the picture. It was a formal wedding portrait, the type of detailed studio photograph popular among New Orleans society families at the turn of the century. The photographer's embossed mark in the corner read, "Lavo and Son Portrait Studio, Royal Street, 1904. The image showed a bride and groom posed in the traditional style of the time. The groom stood straight and stiff in a dark formal suit, his face serious, one hand resting on a decorative chair. Beside him sat the bride. Her white dress was a perfect example of Edwardian fashion, with layers of silk, fine lacework, and a high collar decorated with pearls. But what caught Claire's eye immediately was the bride's veil. It was unusually thick, made of heavy lace that cast deep shadows across her face. Most bridal portraits from that era showed veils pulled back, so the bride's face was clearly visible. These photographs were meant to show beauty and social standing. This veil, however, hung forward and hid much of her face, giving the image an almost ghost-like feeling. Claire carried the photograph to her desk and placed it under her magnifying lamp. The quality was impressive for such an old image. The Lavo studio was known for its technical skill. She could see individual pearls on the dress, the texture of the groom's mustache, and the grain of the wooden chair. Yet the bride's face remained hidden in shadow. Claire could make out the shape of her jaw and features, but her expression could not be read through the heavy veil. Something about the pose felt wrong. The bride's posture looked too stiff. Her hands were clasped tightly in her lap, with a tension that suggested fear rather than happiness. Claire made a note to have the photograph digitally scanned and enhanced. Modern imaging tools could often reveal details the human eye missed, even in photos over 100 years old. She felt this image needed closer study. As she placed the portrait into an acid-free protective sleeve, Claire felt uneasy. Every wedding photo she had ever handled carried some feeling of celebration, even those from strict arranged marriages. This one carried something else. It carried fear. 2 days later, Claire sat beside Marcus Reed in the collection's digital imaging lab. Marcus had worked with historic photographs for 12 years and specialized in restoring and enhancing damaged or faded images. He treated every photograph like a puzzle, uncovering details hidden by time or poor exposure. "Structurally, this one is in great condition," Marcus said as the high-resolution scan appeared on his screen. "The Lavo studio used excellent materials. The print has aged very well. But that veil will be difficult. It's throwing a lot of shadow across her face." Claire leaned closer. "Can you work around it? I want to see her expression, her eyes. Something about this photo feels wrong." Marcus's fingers moved quickly as he adjusted the image. The picture sharpened, the contrast increased slightly. He zoomed in on the bride's face until it filled the screen. The heavy lace created complex patterns of light and shadow, but the software could analyze and reduce them. "I'll try lifting the shadow details without blowing out the highlights," Marcus said as he changed several settings at once. "This will take a moment." As the program processed the image, the bride's face slowly became clearer. The shape of her nose appeared, then her lips, then the outline of her cheeks beneath the veil. Marcus continued refining the image, adjusting midtones and sharpening details. Then Claire saw it. "Marcus, stop!" On the screen, now clearly visible, were lines running down the bride's cheeks. They were not shadows from the lace. They were tears, caught at the exact moment the photograph was taken. The bride had been crying during her wedding portrait. "That's not common," Marcus said softly. Emotional brides existed, but photographers usually waited until they were calm before exposing the plate. These studios charged high fees. Clients expected perfection. "Enhance it more," Claire said, her voice tight. "I want to see everything." Marcus applied more filters and adjusted the tonal curve, pulling out every possible detail beneath the veil. The bride's face filled the screen. Now they could see her expression clearly. Her eyes were wide, her jaw tight, every muscle showing distress. Then Marcus noticed something else. He zoomed in further, focusing on the area around the bride's left eye, where the veil's shadow had been darkest. He increased the exposure carefully. Slowly, discoloration appeared. Once visible, there was no doubt. It was a bruise, dark and severe, spreading from her eye toward her temple. The heavy veil was not a fashion choice. It was meant to hide evidence of violence. Claire and Marcus sat silently, staring at the screen, the crying bride, the hiding veil, the concealed bruise. This was not a simple wedding portrait. It was proof of something much darker. "We have to identify them," Claire said at last. "I need to know who she was and what happened to her." The Lavo and Son Portrait Studio had been one of the most respected photography businesses in early 1900s New Orleans, serving wealthy Creole and American families from the French Quarter and Garden District. The studio closed in 1932, but its records were saved by the Louisiana Photography Archive, kept in a climate-controlled building near Tulane University. Claire contacted the archive's director, Dr. Simone Bertrand, and explained what she had found. Simone immediately understood the importance. "The Lavo's sitting books from that period are very complete," Simone said when Claire arrived the next day. "They recorded everything. They found the 1904 ledger and searched through spring and summer entries. Wedding portraits were marked with a small decorative symbol in the margin. On June 18, 1904, they found it. Wedding portrait, Miss Emily DeVoe and Mr. Robert Thornton, 4 plates exposed, special sitting arrangement, fee, paid in advance by the DeVoe family. The price was unusually high, more than twice the normal rate, and the note about a special arrangement was rare. Claire had reviewed hundreds of entries, and very few had such remarks. "Emily DeVoe," Claire repeated. "That family was well known. I've seen the name before. They owned sugar plantations upriver and valuable property in the city." Simone was already gathering more records. The Lavo studio also kept a private journal with personal notes. The owner, Jean-Baptiste Lavo, often wrote about difficult or memorable sessions. Simone opened the small leather-bound book and turned to June 1904. On June 19th, the day after the sitting, Jean-Baptiste had written at length, "Yesterday's wedding portrait still troubles my conscience." The DeVoe family arrived with the bride exactly on time. Miss Emily was accompanied by her mother, Madame Celeste DeVoe, the groom Mr. Robert Thornton, and another man associated with Mr. Thornton, whose presence made everyone uneasy. The bride appeared unwell, pale, with reddened eyes from recent crying. When I suggested postponing the sitting, Madame DeVoe sharply refused and demanded we continue. The bride said nothing and stared at the floor. Most troubling was the veil. Madame DeVoe brought an unusually heavy veil and insisted it be placed forward to cover much of her daughter's face. When I objected, she became agitated and insisted it remain. I posed the couple as instructed. Through my lens, I saw the bride trembling, not from excitement, but from fear. Mr. Thornton kept a firm hand on her shoulder throughout. When I asked her to turn her head slightly, his grip tightened and she flinched. He smiled and said she was simply overwhelmed. I exposed 4 plates and wanted them gone. As they left, the bride looked at me, and even through that cursed veil, her eyes begged for help. I could do nothing. The marriage was legal. "I fear I have witnessed something terrible." Jean-Baptiste wrote that Madame DeVoe returned 3 days later, pleased with the portraits, paid the balance, and said the couple had already left for a long honeymoon abroad. She did not say where. Claire and Simone sat quietly after reading the entry. Jean-Baptiste Lavo had seen the truth and had been haunted by it. "We need to find out what happened to Emily DeVoe," Claire said. "Marriage records, newspapers, anything." Simone nodded and began making notes. Families like the DeVos were always mentioned in society pages. The Times-Picayune and the Daily States would surely hold more answers. If there were any notices about the wedding or the couple's later life, they should have appeared in the newspapers. But Claire kept thinking about John Baptist's final note. The couple had left for a long honeymoon abroad, with no place named. In 1904, abroad could mean almost anywhere, Europe, South America, even Asia. Following someone who left the country without a clear destination would be nearly impossible unless something had forced them back into public records. A death, a scandal, or a legal issue that required paperwork. Claire knew she could not just look for happy stories of a successful marriage. She needed to search for any sign of Emily DeVoe Thornton in the years after that disturbing wedding portrait. "I'll start with the newspapers," Claire said. "First, the marriage notice, then any later mentions of the DeVoe or Thornton families. There has to be something. People this rich don't just vanish." Even as she said it, she felt a cold fear. In 1904, once a woman married, she legally belonged to her husband. If Robert Thornton wanted his wife to disappear, to take her far away from her family and anyone who might help her, the law would fully support him. The heavy veil hiding tears and bruises suggested that was exactly his plan. The Times-Picayune archives were fully digitized and searchable, which made Claire's work much easier than it would have been years earlier. She began with June 1904, looking for the wedding announcement that would have come before the portrait was taken. She found it in the June 12 edition 1 week earlier. Marriage of interest to society. Miss Emily Celeste DeVoe, daughter of Mr. Henri and Madame Celeste DeVoe of Audubon Place, to Mr. Robert Harrison Thornton of Boston, Massachusetts. The ceremony will be held at the DeVoe family residence on June 17th, followed by a private reception for family and close friends. Mr. Thornton is connected to maritime shipping interests and has recently formed business ties in New Orleans. The couple will reside abroad following the wedding. The notice was short and almost careless, which was strange for a family as important as the DeVoes. Most society weddings received long articles describing the bride's dress, flowers, guests, and celebrations. This one felt more like a formality than a celebration. Claire noted several details. Thornton was from Boston, involved in shipping, and was new to New Orleans. The wedding was at the family home, not a church, suggesting urgency or secrecy. And again, there was the vague statement that the couple would live abroad, with no location or timeline given. Claire searched for any follow-up stories. There were no reports of the wedding itself, no descriptions, no photographs, nothing. For a family of that status, the silence was shocking. She then searched for Robert Thornton in Boston newspapers. Several mentions appeared. He had been involved in shipping businesses and had once been investigated for cargo insurance fraud, though the case was dropped for lack of proof. Society columns mentioned him attending events where wealthy widows or unmarried SSEs were present. A clear pattern formed. Robert Thornton was a fortune seeker. He targeted rich families, especially those with daughters ready for marriage. He had once been engaged to a young woman in Philadelphia, but the engagement ended suddenly, under circumstances the newspapers chose not to explain. Claire felt sick. The DeVoe family had married their daughter to a man with a suspicious past, a man linked to fraud, a man whose earlier engagement ended mysteriously. Why would they do this? Claire searched for records about the DeVoe family's finances around 1903 and 1904. After hours of digging through business reports, property records, and loan filings, she found the answer. The DeVoe sugar plantations had been losing money for years. Poor harvests and competition from Caribbean sugar had badly hurt the family's income. In March 1904, Henri DeVoe took out a large loan to cover debts and protect the family's lifestyle. The loan came from a Boston financial firm. Robert Thornton was listed as a partner. Everything made sense. Thornton had effectively bought Emily DeVoe. He gave her father the money the family desperately needed. In return, he gained a young wife from a respected New Orleans family, giving him status and connections. Emily, trapped by duty and social pressure, had no real choice. Claire widened her search beyond New Orleans, looking for any trace of Robert and Emily Thornton after their wedding. They were said to have gone abroad, but where, and did they ever return? The first clue came from a ship passenger list dated July 1904. The SS Britannic, sailing from New York to Liverpool, listed Mr. and Mrs. R.H. Thornton among its first-class passengers, noted as traveling for an extended continental tour. They had gone to Europe. Claire searched British and French newspaper archives, a slow and frustrating task because many records were incomplete or needed translation. 3 months later, she found a short mention in a Paris Society column from October 1904. It noted the presence of the American couple, the Thorntons, at a reception hosted by a French banking family. After that, nothing. No more mentions in Europe. No records of their return to America. It was as if they had disappeared somewhere on the continent. Claire turned her attention back to the Deval family. If Emily had written to her parents, if there had been any news, there should be some trace. What she found was worse than silence. In February 1905, 8 months after the wedding, Madame Celeste Devaux had been admitted to a private sanatorium outside New Orleans for treatment of severe nervous illness. Records from the Louisiana Medical Archives described her as deeply distressed over her daughter's fate, showing strong guilt and fear. The doctor's notes recorded her words. She said she had begged them not to force Emily to marry him. She said he frightened her, that there was cruelty in his eyes, but they needed the money. Henri said they had no choice. Now Emily was gone and no letters came. She was sure he would not allow her daughter to write. She did not know if Emily was alive or dead. Henri Devaux visited his wife once in March 1905. The doctor noted that he became defensive, insisted their daughter was happy abroad, and claimed letters had been sent but lost in the mail. When Madame Devaux demanded proof, he left suddenly and never returned. Madame Devaux remained in the sanatorium for 2 years. She was released in 1907, but her health never recovered. Claire found her death certificate from November 1908. The cause was heart failure, but a note added that she had suffered long-term sadness linked to an unresolved family tragedy. A mother who had traded her daughter for financial safety and spent her final years drowning in guilt. Claire felt heavy sadness reading the records. The Deval family had made a terrible decision, and Madame Devaux had understood it too late. But Emily's fate still remained. Was she alive somewhere in Europe, trapped in a cruel marriage? Had she tried to escape, or had something worse happened? Claire knew Robert Thornton was the key. If Emily was to be found, his path had to be traced. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. A genealogy researcher in London named Elizabeth Parker, who studied American expatriates in Edwardian Europe, responded to one of Claire's research posts. Elizabeth wrote that she had come across the name Thornton while reviewing American deaths registered in France between 1904 and 1910. There was a death certificate from Nice dated January 1906 for an Emily Thornton, age 22. Her nationality was listed as American. Cause of death was recorded as an accidental fall from a villa balcony. The document had been filed by her husband, Robert Harrison Thornton. Claire's hands trembled as she read the message. Emily had died nearly 120 years ago, just 18 months after the wedding portrait. An accidental fall. Elizabeth had included scanned copies of the French death and burial records. Claire studied them carefully. They were official, properly signed. Emily had been buried in the Protestant section of the local cemetery, in a small plot purchased by her husband. Elizabeth added more. Robert Thornton stayed in France for another year, then returned to Boston in 1907. He remarried in 1909, again to a young woman from a wealthy family, this time from New York. That wife died in 1911, also from an accidental fall, this time down a staircase in their Manhattan home. 2 wives, both dead from falls, both shortly after marriage. The pattern was clear. Robert Thornton was not just a fortune hunter, he was a killer, marrying wealthy women and eliminating them once he gained access to their money. Claire immediately contacted the New Orleans Police Department's Historical Crimes Unit. Though the cases were far too old for legal action, there was value in officially recording the truth. There could be other victims, other families who never knew what happened. Detective James Rousseau, who specialized in cold cases, was immediately interested. He said they had seen similar patterns in historical research. Men who preyed on women in a time when wives had few rights and suspicious deaths were easily dismissed. Claire sent him everything. The wedding portrait, Jean-Baptiste's journal, family records, death certificates, all of it. She continued researching Emily herself. Who had she been before Thornton? What did she love? What dreams had been taken from her? Newspaper fragments showed Emily as a talented pianist, fluent in French and English, A 1902 article mentioned her charity work for a children's hospital, praising her kindness. A young woman with promise and compassion, sold by desperate parents to a monster, dead before her 23rd birthday. Detective Russo later uncovered even more. Robert Harrison Thornton had married 4 times between 1904 and 1916. All 4 wives died under suspicious circumstances: falls, drownings, accidents that seemed believable alone but horrifying together. Thornton followed the same method every time. He found wealthy families in trouble, offered financial help, courted their daughters, married quickly and quietly, then removed his wives from their families and support systems. Within 18 months to 2 years, each wife would die in an accident, and Thornton would inherit whatever money or property had been settled on her through the marriage contract. Between marriages, Thornton would vanish for months or even years, living abroad on the wealth he had gathered, then return to the United States to begin the pattern again. He chose families in different cities: New Orleans, New York, Philadelphia, Baltimore, never repeating the same place, never leaving a clear trail that might warn authorities or future victims. He was, in effect, a serial killer, Russo explained when he met with Claire to review the findings. But because the victims were his legal wives, and because their deaths could be explained as accidents, no serious investigation was ever pursued. In that era, a husband's account of his wife's death was rarely challenged, especially if he was wealthy and well-connected. Russo had uncovered death certificates, burial records, and even newspaper notices for all 4 wives. Only the 4th wife, Helen Bradford of Baltimore, had drawn real suspicion. Her father, a respected attorney, demanded an inquest after her death in 1916. Even then, the coroner's jury ruled it an accident, a tragic fall down the stairs, despite the father's claims that his daughter had told him she feared her husband. "What happened to Thornton?" Claire asked. "Did he ever face justice?" Russo showed her a death certificate dated November 1918. Robert Harrison Thornton had died during the influenza pandemic. "There's some irony there," Russo said. "He survived 4 murders and was taken by illness. He was 52, died in a Boston hospital, and was buried in an unmarked grave. No children, no close family, and apparently no friends willing to pay for a proper burial." Claire felt a strange mix of emotions: relief that Thornton could never hurt anyone again, anger that he was never held accountable, and deep sorrow for the 4 women whose lives he had taken. Emily DeVoe had been the first young woman destroyed by his careful cruelty. "I want to do something for them," Claire said, "for Emily and the others. They deserve to be remembered as more than victims, more than notes in a killer's story." Russo nodded. "What do you have in mind?" Claire thought about the wedding portrait, about Jean-Baptiste Lavau's painful journal entry, about Madame Devoux's final years filled with guilt. She thought about how Emily had left signs of her terror in plain view: the tears, the bruise, the silent plea in her eyes that the camera had captured and preserved. "I want to tell their stories," Claire said, "all of them. I want to show who they were, what they loved, what was taken from them. And I want people to understand that wedding portrait for what it truly is: evidence of a crime and proof of courage." Over the following months, Claire devoted herself fully to researching the lives of Robert Thornton's 4 victims. She contacted descendants, searched archives, and collected letters and photographs, slowly rebuilding the women's lives before Thornton destroyed them. Emily DeVoux emerged as a deeply artistic young woman who studied piano seriously and dreamed of becoming a music teacher. Letters to a childhood friend, found in a private collection, spoke of her love for Chopin and her hope to one day study music in Paris, a dream already crushed by her family's money problems before Thornton appeared. The second victim, Grace Worthington of New York, was a gifted painter whose watercolors had been shown in a small Manhattan gallery. After her family lost their fortune in a bank collapse, Grace quietly supported them by selling her art under a false name. Thornton learned of their situation and presented himself as a rescuer. Grace died 6 months after their marriage in 1909, drowning in Lake Como during their honeymoon. Her paintings were sold by Thornton shortly after her death. The third victim, Catherine Price of Philadelphia, was a writer. W.O. published essays and poetry in literary magazines under her maiden name. She had been engaged to a young journalist, but her family broke the engagement when their textile business failed and creditors closed in. Thornton bought the family's debts and married Catherine in 1911. She died later that year after falling from a hotel balcony in San Francisco. Her unpublished work vanished, likely destroyed by Thornton. The fourth victim, Helen Bradford of Baltimore, worked as a volunteer teacher for immigrant children when Thornton met her. Her father, an attorney, had borrowed money while handling a difficult bankruptcy case. Thornton provided the loan and then pursued Helen aggressively. She told friends that he frightened her, but family pressure pushed her into marriage. She died in 1916, and her father spent the rest of his life trying without success to prove she had been murdered. 4 intelligent, creative, compassionate women, all erased by a man who saw them only as tools for wealth. Claire felt the weight of their stolen futures as she worked. She partnered with the New Orleans Historical Collection to create a special exhibition, hidden in plain sight, built around the wedding portrait and the truth it concealed. The exhibition focused on Emily's photograph, displayed beside Jean-Baptiste Laveau's journal entry and the enhanced images revealing the tears and bruise beneath the veil. But it also told the full story. All 4 women, their lives, their dreams, the pattern of Thornton's crimes, and the failures that allowed him to kill for 12 years. Claire included information about domestic violence support, linking past and present, showing that women in abusive situations still struggle to be believed and protected. The exhibition opened in October 2024, and the reaction was overwhelming. Descendants of all 4 women attended, many meeting for the first time, sharing family stories that had been whispered for generations but never fully understood. The bruise beneath Emily's veil, once hidden by shadow and time, now stood as clear evidence, not only of one man's cruelty, but of a society that allowed it to continue. One of the most powerful moments came during the opening reception. Claire noticed an elderly woman standing still before Emily's wedding portrait. Tears filled the woman's eyes as she held a worn photograph in shaking hands. Claire approached gently. "I'm Claire Duchamp, the curator. Can I help you?" The woman turned, her face full of emotion. "My name is Marie Devaux-Laurent. Emily was my great-great-aunt. I never knew her story. My family never spoke of her. They only said she married and died young abroad. No details. It was like she had been erased." Marie lifted the photograph she carried. It showed a young girl, about 14, smiling brightly at the camera, full of hope. "This is Emily before everything went wrong," she said. "Before the money troubles, before Thornton. This is who she really was." Claire felt tears rise in her own eyes. "Would you allow us to include this photograph in the exhibition?" she asked softly. "People should see her as she was, not only in that wedding portrait." Marie nodded. "That's why I brought it. Emily deserves to be remembered as more than a victim. She was kind, talented, alive, and she tried to resist. She shared family stories passed down quietly, how Emily begged not to be forced into the marriage, how she sensed something dark in Thornton that her father refused to see." Over the next hour, Marie shared everything she knew. Claire recorded it all and added it to the exhibition. The smiling photograph of young Emily was placed beside the wedding portrait, creating a painful before and after contrast. Hope and joy beside fear and despair. In the weeks that followed, more descendants came forward. A great-granddaughter of Grace Worthington brought several of Grace's watercolors, preserved in an attic. A descendant of Catherine Price found a trunk containing her unpublished poems and essays, revealing sharp insight and deep compassion. Helen Bradford's great-nephew donated letters she had written, describing her fear of Thornton and her distress at being pushed into marriage. Each contribution strengthened the exhibition and restored the women's voices. They had been artists, writers, teachers, musicians, women with gifts to share, women sacrificed by families desperate to survive financially or protect social status. The exhibition gained national attention, featured in journals and popular media. Scholars studied it as an example of gender, class, and violence in early 20th century America. Domestic violence groups used it to show that abuse and control are not new problems, only often hidden. For Claire, the greatest result was simple. She had given a voice to 4 women long silenced. She had turned a wedding portrait from proof of cruelty and silence into evidence of truth and courage. The heavy veil meant to hide Emily's tears and bruises had failed. Technology had lifted the shadows, revealing what Jean-Baptiste Laveau had felt but could not fully see. More than a century later, Emily Devaux and the three women who shared her fate were finally remembered, not as forgotten victims or shameful secrets, but as real people whose lives mattered, whose talents were real, and whose courage deserved honor. The wedding portrait remains on permanent display at the New Orleans Historical Collection, its details clear. Emily's tears and dark bruise no longer hidden. Visitors stand quietly before it, reading her story, understanding what the photograph truly shows, a moment of terror captured and preserved, transformed by time and determination into remembrance, warning, and justice.